Chapter 1. Shadows in the Night. In the narrow, dimly lit streets of the city, the dense fog made it difficult to distinguish the line between reality and illusion. At night, the cold, damp concrete absorbed the echoes of furtive footsteps and the distant murmur of whispered conversations. At the corner of Liberty Street, a neon sign flickered in red, Costa Detective Agency. It was a promise of hope for some and a last resort for others. Inside the office, Ricardo Costa observed the city through a dirty window. His penetrating gaze, marked by years of experience, scanned the darkness, seeking answers in a world full of questions. The yellowish light of an old lamp cast shadows on the wall, creating a macabre dance of light and darkness. Ricardo was a man of few words and many secrets. His past was buried under layers of invisible scars, memories of past cases that still haunted him. His austere face and worn black coat were symbols of his dedication and sacrifice. As he lit a cigarette, the old phone on the desk broke the silence with a sharp ring. Ricardo hesitated for a moment before answering. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, trembling and desperate, filled the space. "Hello? Detective Costa?" the voice asked, laden with fear and urgency. "Yes, this is he," Ricardo replied, his voice firm. "My name is Clara Martins. I need help. My husband, Eduardo, he's involved in something terrible. I'm sure of it. I don't know where else to turn." Ricardo could hear the panic in Clara's voice, but he also detected an undertone of despair. He knew that tone well. It was the sound of someone on the brink of losing everything. "Stay calm, Mrs. Martins. I need more details. Where can I meet you?" he asked, picking up a notepad and pen. "I'm at the cafe on the corner of Flower Street and Central Avenue." "I'll be waiting for you," Clara said before abruptly hanging up. Ricardo stubbed out the cigarette and grabbed his hat and coat. Stepping out into the cold night, he felt the familiar sensation of adrenaline mixed with apprehension. The rain was beginning to fall lightly, as if the city itself were crying for its secrets. Upon arriving at the cafe, Ricardo spotted Clara sitting at a corner table, her eyes fixed on the door. She was a beautiful woman, but fear and worry had left their marks on her delicate face. Ricardo approached slowly and introduced himself. "Mrs. Martins, I'm Ricardo Costa. How can I help you?" he said, sitting down across from her. "Detective, my husband, he's changed. He's become distant, evasive. I've discovered strange messages, money transactions that don't make sense. I think he's involved with dangerous people," Clara explained, her voice faltering as she tried to maintain her composure. Ricardo nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. He knew this wouldn't be a simple infidelity investigation. There was something darker hidden in the shadows, something that would need to be unearthed with care. "We'll find out what's going on, Mrs. Martins. I'll need all the information you can give me about him and his recent activities," Ricardo said, trying to calm Clara. The night was just beginning, and Ricardo knew he was about to dive into a world of betrayals, lies, and hidden dangers. But he also knew he was not alone. The city had its own secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. Chapter 2. The Call to Action. The rain fell harder as Ricardo and Clara left the cafe. Under the awning, he offered his umbrella to shield her from the relentless drops. They walked together through the wet streets, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the soaked pavement, until they reached the nearest taxi stand. "Let's go to my office," Ricardo said, opening the taxi door for Clara. "We can talk there with more calm and privacy." During the brief ride, Clara stared out the window, lost in thought. Her nervousness was palpable, and Ricardo felt the gravity of the situation increasing with each passing minute. Back at the office, Clara settled into one of the worn leather armchairs while Ricardo fetched a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured a measure for each, hoping it would help ease the tension. "Tell me more about Eduardo, Mrs. Martins," Ricardo requested, his voice gentle yet firm. Clara took a deep breath before beginning to speak. "Eduardo has always been a hard-working, dedicated man. We have a comfortable life, but in recent months something has changed. He started working late, with last-minute business trips. One night, I found a message on his phone from an unknown number. It said, 'The cargo has arrived. Meeting tomorrow at midnight at Warehouse 42. Ricardo frowned, intrigued. "And you mentioned suspicious financial transactions?" "Yes," Clara nodded, her expression grave. "Large sums of money being transferred to accounts in tax havens. I confront Eduardo, but he always has an excuse. I don't know what to think anymore." Ricardo stood and went to his desk, retrieving a notepad. "I'll need these details. Can you send me the messages and financial records?" Clara opened her purse and pulled out a thick envelope, handing it to Ricardo. "It's all here. Detective, I'm afraid Eduardo is involved in something illegal or dangerous." Ricardo took the envelope and looked at Clara, his eyes reflecting his determination to uncover the truth. "I will investigate this, Mrs. Martins. I promise I'll find out what's going on with your husband." Clara nodded, hope beginning to shine in her eyes. "Thank you, Detective. I really don't know what I would do without your help." After Clara left, Ricardo examined the documents in the envelope. Encrypted messages, suspicious bank transfers, and the name of the warehouse. He knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but the call to action was irresistible. He donned his coat once more, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. As he left the office, the rain had lessened, but the city was still shrouded in thick fog. Ricardo headed to Warehouse 42, a remote and grim location on the outskirts of the city. When he arrived, he parked his car on a side street and observed the surroundings. There was little activity, but enough to raise suspicion. As he approached, he saw figures moving in the shadows. Burly men with furtive glances guarded the entrance. He needed to be cautious. Finding a strategic observation point, hidden among stacked crates and abandoned equipment, he watched closely. Ricardo knew that this night could be the beginning of something much larger, something that went beyond a simple marital infidelity. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and he was determined to solve the mystery, no matter the cost. Chapter 3. Initial Investigations. The early morning hours found Ricardo Costa delving deeper into Eduardo Martins' world. Warehouse 42 was a starting point, but he knew the real answers lay at Eduardo's workplace, the Martins Import and Export Company. At dawn, Ricardo blended in among the company's workers, dressed casually with a cap pulled low, his experience in undercover investigations guiding every move. He observed the employees arriving, mentally noting faces, behaviors, and interactions. His intuition told him that the key to understanding Eduardo was in the daily routines and the people around him. Inside the company, the environment appeared normal. Modern offices, people diligently working at their desks, and a busy reception area. Ricardo approached the receptionist, a friendly young woman named Julia. "Good morning. May I help you?" Julia asked, with a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm Roberto, a security consultant hired to review some internal procedures. I need to speak with a few managers about recent operations," Ricardo said, displaying a fake badge he had prepared. Julia, unsuspecting, pointed the way. "Of course, Mr. Roberto. The operations manager, Mr. Mendez, is available. His office is the second on the left down the main corridor." Ricardo thanked her and headed to the indicated office. Upon arrival, he knocked and entered after receiving an affirmative response. "Mr. Mendez, I'm Roberto, the security consultant. I'm here to review some recent operations. Could you give me an overview?" Ricardo asked, while observing the burly man sitting at the desk. Mendez, a middle-aged man with a tired appearance, nodded and began explaining the company's routine. As Mendez spoke, Ricardo scrutinized every detail, looking for inconsistencies and signs of suspicious activities. "What about Eduardo Martins? Is he directly involved in operations?" Ricardo asked casually. Mendez hesitated for a moment before replying. "Eduardo is one of the directors. He usually handles international negotiations. In recent months, he's been very busy with trips and meetings outside the office." Noticing the hesitation, Ricardo decided to dig deeper. "Can you provide me with a list of people he's been meeting recently? Just to ensure everything is compliant with regulations." Reluctantly, Mendez handed over a list of names and contacts. Ricardo thanked him and left the office, his mind racing as he analyzed the information. Later, at the corner cafe, Ricardo met one of Eduardo's colleagues, a man named Carlos, who seemed more approachable. After some informal questions and a dose of charm, Ricardo got Carlos to talk. "Eduardo's been acting strange. He's always on the phone, using terms that don't make sense to us. And he has a group of friends we've never seen before, people who seem dangerous," Carlos confided. With this new information, Ricardo returned to his office and began compiling a more detailed profile of Eduardo. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. He knew he was getting close to something big, something that went beyond a simple marital infidelity. Ricardo spent the night sifting through documents, analyzing financial records, and connecting dots between Eduardo and his suspicious activities. The connection to organized crime was becoming increasingly clear, but he needed more evidence before he could act. The sound of the night city outside mingled with his thoughts as he devised his plan. The fog still hung over the city, and Ricardo knew that in the shadows lay truths many feared to reveal. He was determined to bring these secrets to light, no matter the cost. Chapter 4. Interrogating Clara. The night was dense, and the city, shrouded in fog, seemed to harbor more secrets than usual. Ricardo returned to his office with an unsettling feeling. He knew he needed more information to fully understand Eduardo's involvement with organized crime. And for that, Clara Martins was the key. Ricardo called Clara, asking her to come to his office again. She arrived a few minutes later, even more nervous than before. The rain had begun to fall, and she entered the office with a soaked coat, her eyes searching for some comfort in the detective's presence. "Sit down, Clara," Ricardo said, pointing to the worn leather armchair. "We need to talk more in depth about Eduardo and what you know about his recent activities." Clara nodded, her large haunted eyes reflecting the soft light of the lamp. "Of course, detective. What do you need to know? I want you to tell me more about Eduardo's behavior in the past few months. Any detail could be useful. When did you start noticing changes?" Ricardo asked, his tone gentle yet firm. Clara took a deep breath and began to speak. "It all started about 6 months ago. Eduardo began coming home late, always with excuses about meetings or business dinners. He spent more time at the office and seemed constantly worried, checking his phone every 5 minutes. Ricardo took notes as Clara spoke, each word of hers a piece of the complex puzzle he was assembling. "You mentioned strange messages and money transfers. Can you tell me more about that?" he asked, not taking his eyes off her. "Yes. I found several messages on his phone, all from unknown numbers. They talked about cargo, meetings, and transfers. And when I looked at his bank accounts, I saw large sums being transferred to accounts in countries I had never heard of," Clara said, her voice trembling. Ricardo felt he was getting closer to the truth. And these business trips? Did he mention where he was going or who he was meeting? Clara hesitated before answering. He always said they were short trips, but never mentioned the destinations. And when he returned, he was always more distant, more evasive. Ricardo sensed that Clara was holding something back. "Clara, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there something else you haven't told me?" Clara lowered her eyes, seeming to struggle with her emotions. There is a woman. I don't know who she is, but I found an earring in Eduardo's car. When I confronted him, he said it belonged to a colleague he was giving a ride to. But I didn't believe him." The revelation added a new layer to the mystery. Ricardo knew he needed to identify this woman and understand her role in Eduardo's life. "Clara, you did well to tell me this. It could be crucial to the investigation," Ricardo said, trying to reassure her. "I need you to remember any other detail, anything that could help us identify her." Clara nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I'll try. I just want this to be over soon. I'm afraid of what Eduardo might be involved in." Ricardo placed his hand on hers, a rare gesture of empathy. "We'll solve this, Clara. I promise. Now, I need to investigate further. Stay in touch, and if you remember anything else, let me know immediately." Clara stood up, still visibly shaken, but with a new determination in her eyes. She left the office, and Ricardo was left alone with his thoughts, reviewing the new information. The investigation was taking a dangerous turn, but he was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. As the rain continued to fall outside, Ricardo knew the night still held many revelations. He took his notes and began planning his next steps, aware that each move needed to be calculated with precision. Chapter 5. Discovery of Crucial Evidence. The early hours of the morning advanced, and Ricardo's office was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by the dim light of the lamp. Clara's words echoed in the detective's mind as he meticulously analyzed the documents she had left. Each page, each line of text, was a potential clue, a key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Eduardo Martins. Ricardo picked up the financial records and began scrutinizing the suspicious bank transfers. Large sums of money were being sent to accounts in countries known for being tax havens. He made detailed notes, trying to trace the origin and destination of these funds. Moving on to the encrypted messages, Ricardo noticed that many of them contained specific terms suggesting illegal operations. Words like cargo, delivery, and warehouse were used repeatedly, indicating the possible movement of illicit goods. He knew he needed to decrypt these messages to fully understand what was happening. Ricardo decided the next step would be to check the public records of the companies involved. He accessed a confidential database and started looking for connections between Eduardo and other suspicious entities. It was then that he found something that made his heart race. A shell company, registered in the name of an associate of Eduardo, was linked to an international smuggling network. With this new discovery, Ricardo knew he was dealing with something much larger than a simple marital infidelity. He would need to proceed with caution, as the people involved would not hesitate to eliminate any threat to their business. Determined to gather more evidence, Ricardo went to the address of the shell company. The location was an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The faded facade and broken windows indicated that no one had used the building in a long time. However, Ricardo knew that appearances could be deceiving. Using his lockpicking skills, he managed to open the back door and entered silently. The darkness of the place was interrupted only by the glow of his flashlight. Every step echoed in the empty corridors, heightening the tension. He searched for any evidence that would confirm his suspicions. After an hour of meticulous searching, Ricardo found a hidden office in the basement. The room was filled with documents, old computers, and files. He began sifting through the papers, looking for something that linked Eduardo and his accomplices to the smuggling operation. Then he found what he was looking for, a series of records detailing illegal transactions, lists of smuggled goods, and names of international contacts. Among the names, Eduardo Martins appeared repeatedly, confirming his involvement. Ricardo took photos of the most incriminating documents with his camera, knowing that this evidence would be essential to dismantling the criminal operation. He was about to leave when he heard heavy footsteps approaching. Quickly hiding behind a pile of boxes, his hand on the holster of his gun, he prepared for any eventuality. Two men entered the room, speaking in low voices. They were burly, clearly bodyguards or henchmen of the organization. Ricardo held his breath, hoping they wouldn't discover his presence. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the men left, and Ricardo seized the opportunity to escape the building. Back in his office, Ricardo felt the adrenaline begin to dissipate. He reviewed the photos of the documents, knowing he had enough evidence to implicate Eduardo and his smuggling network. But there were still many unanswered questions. Who was the mysterious woman? And what would Eduardo's next move be? Ricardo knew he was only at the beginning. He needed to continue the investigation, uncover all the pieces of the puzzle, and ensure that justice was served. With this new evidence in hand, he was more determined than ever to press on, regardless of the dangers that lay ahead. Chapter 6. Mafia Involvement. Morning arrived, bringing with it a new layer of fog, enveloping the city in a gray shroud. Ricardo Costa knew he was dealing with something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The evidence he found the previous night linked Eduardo Martins directly to international smuggling, but there was something more sinister at play: the Mafia. Back at his office, Ricardo barely had time to take a sip of coffee before his phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold and threatening. "Detective Costa, we know what you're doing. Stop now or suffer the consequences," the voice said, before abruptly hanging up. Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. The threats were a clear sign he was on the right track, but they also meant he was being closely watched. Determined not to be intimidated, he knew he had to act quickly. Taking his notes, Ricardo began to draw connections between Eduardo and known organized crime figures. The names in the documents led him to a series of notorious mafiosos, each more dangerous than the last. He knew he needed more information, so he decided to reach out to an informant who had helped in past investigations. Ricardo found his contact, a former mafioso named Vitor, in a seedy bar in the city's suburbs. Vitor, an aged but still sharp man, was sitting in a dark corner, his eyes always alert to the movement around him. "Costa, didn't expect to see you again," Vitor said as Ricardo sat beside him. "What brings you here?" "I need information about Eduardo Martins and his connection to the Mafia." I'm in the middle of something big and dangerous, and I need to know what I'm up against, Ricardo replied, getting straight to the point. Vitor glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Eduardo got mixed up with some heavy hitters. He's involved in a smuggling network controlled by a mafia family. The boss is a man named Giovanni Moretti, and he doesn't like interference. Ricardo had heard of Moretti, a feared name in the city's underworld. What else do you know about him and his operations? Moretti is smart and ruthless. He controls everything with an iron fist, from drug trafficking to arms smuggling. Eduardo is just a pawn, but an important one. If you go after Moretti, you'd better be ready for a war, Vitor warned, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. As they talked, a group of men entered the bar, their eyes immediately fixing on Ricardo and Vitor. It was clear they were there to send a strong message. Ricardo discreetly placed his hand on the gun under his coat, ready for anything. Looks like your presence hasn't gone unnoticed, Costa. Be careful, Vitor whispered, before standing and quickly exiting through the back door. The men approached Ricardo, their intentions clear. Detective Costa, you've been warned. This is your last chance to back off, one of the men said, as the others closed in around him. Ricardo knew he couldn't back down. He stood up slowly, maintaining his composure. If you want to stop me, you'll have to do better than this. Before they could react, Ricardo drew his gun and fired a shot into the air, creating a distraction that gave him time to escape the bar. He ran through the narrow streets, his heart pounding, knowing the mafia wouldn't give up easily. Back in his car, Ricardo took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew he was closer to uncovering the criminal network. With the details Vitor had provided, he now had a clear target, Giovanni Moretti. As he drove through the foggy streets, Ricardo realized he was venturing into unknown and dangerous territory. The city seemed even darker, and every shadow was a potential threat. But he was determined to press on, regardless of the risks. Ricardo headed straight for the city's archives, where he hoped to find more information on Moretti's operations. He spent hours combing through old newspapers, police reports, and public records, piecing together Moretti's criminal empire. Each connection he made, each name he uncovered, brought him closer to understanding the full scope of the mafia's activities and Eduardo's involvement. As night fell, Ricardo returned to his office, his mind racing with new leads and strategies. He knew he had to be careful, but he also knew that the evidence he had gathered was just the beginning. The battle against Moretti and his network would be long and perilous, but Ricardo was ready. The fog outside thickened, mirroring the murky world of crime and deception he was about to plunge deeper into. Yet, with determination and a sense of justice burning within him, Ricardo Costa prepared for the next phase of his investigation, fully aware of the dangers that lay ahead. Chapter 7. Clara in Danger. Ricardo had barely slept that night. The mafia's threats echoed in his mind, and he knew he had to be more cautious than ever. At dawn, the first thing he did was try to contact Clara to ensure she was safe. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail, increasing his worry. He decided to go to her house. Upon arrival, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door was ajar. Ricardo drew his gun and entered the house silently. His eyes scanned the surroundings, looking for any sign of Clara or danger. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, and papers scattered across the floor. "Clara?" he called out, his voice low but firm. No response. Ricardo quickly ascended the stairs, each step a mix of fear and determination. He found her bedroom empty, but the bed was unmade and there were clear signs of a struggle. A sense of desperation began to take hold, but he knew he couldn't lose focus. Back in the living room, he noticed Clara's phone on the floor. Picking it up, he saw a recent message from an unknown number. "We have her. Drop the case or she dies. Warehouse 42, midnight." Ricardo felt a knot form in his stomach. The kidnappers were serious. Clara was in danger, and he had little time to save her. Determined to act, he began to plan his next move. Back at his office, Ricardo gathered all the resources he had. He needed help and remembered the informant within the mafia that Veter had mentioned. It was a risk, but he had no other choice. After making several calls, Ricardo arranged a meeting with the informant, a man known only as the Cat. They met in an abandoned warehouse, far from prying eyes. The Cat was a lean and agile man, with eyes that seemed to see everything. "Costa, I heard you're in trouble," said the Cat, lighting a cigarette. "What do you need from me?" "Clara Martins has been kidnapped. I need to rescue her and take down Moretti. I need information on the security at Warehouse 42 and any weaknesses I can exploit," Ricardo replied, getting straight to the point. The Cat nodded slowly, considering the situation. "Moretti keeps the warehouse well guarded, but there's a shift change at 11:30. That's your best chance. There's also a back entrance that few know about. Use it to your advantage." Ricardo thanked him and left to prepare. Time was against him, and every minute counted. As night approached, he armed himself and reviewed the plan multiple times, determined not to make any mistakes. At 11:30, Ricardo was positioned near Warehouse 42. He saw the shift change occur, the guards temporarily dispersing. Moving with the skill of a predator, he approached the back entrance. Using his tools, he silently opened the door and entered, his senses on high alert. The interior of the warehouse was dark and silent. Ricardo advanced through the shadows, avoiding detection. Finally, he spotted Clara, tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by a few goons. His heart raced, but he remained calm. With calculated precision, Ricardo neutralized the guards one by one, using silent and effective techniques. When he reached Clara, she was conscious but visibly shaken. "Clara, it's okay. I'm here to get you out," he whispered as he untied her. Before they could leave, a cold voice echoed through the warehouse. "I knew you would come, Costa." Giovanni Moretti emerged from the shadows, accompanied by more armed goons. Ricardo positioned himself defensively, ready for the battle he knew was coming. "Let Clara go, Moretti. This is between us," Ricardo said, trying to negotiate. Moretti laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're in no position to make demands, detective." The tension in the warehouse was palpable, the impending fight unavoidable. Ricardo knew the only way out was through combat. With Clara by his side, he was ready to face anything, determined to protect her at all costs. Ricardo scanned the room, assessing the situation. He spotted potential cover and escape routes while Moretti's men closed in. The detective's mind raced, formulating a plan. He whispered to Clara, "Stay close to me and follow my lead." With a swift motion, Ricardo fired at the lights, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Chaos ensued as Moretti's men scrambled. Ricardo moved quickly, using the confusion to his advantage. He guided Clara through the shadows, taking down enemies with precise shots and close-quarters combat. Moretti's voice cut through the darkness. "Find them. Don't let them escape." Ricardo and Clara navigated the maze of crates and machinery, inching closer to the exit. The sound of footsteps and gunfire echoed around them. Just as they neared the door, a guard emerged, blocking their path. Ricardo acted swiftly, disarming the man and rendering him unconscious. They burst through the exit, the cool night air hitting their faces. Ricardo led Clara to his car, parked discreetly nearby. As they sped away, he glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the warehouse fade into the distance. "We're not safe yet," Ricardo said, his voice tense. "Moretti will come after us." Clara nodded, her eyes wide with fear but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Ricardo. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ricardo tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "We'll figure this out. I promise." As they drove through the foggy streets, Ricardo's mind raced with thoughts of their next move. They needed a safe place to regroup and plan their strategy. The battle with Moretti had just begun, and Ricardo knew it would be a fight to the finish. But with Clara safe for now, he felt a renewed sense of determination. They would expose Moretti's crimes and bring him to justice, no matter the cost. Chapter 8. Rescue Plan. The tension in Warehouse 42 was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Ricardo Costa knew that every second counted. With Clara Martins by his side, he felt the weight of responsibility. Moretti and his goons were lurking, and Ricardo needed to act quickly. "Clara, stay behind me." "I'm getting you out of here," Ricardo murmured, quickly scanning the environment for any advantage. Moretti's henchmen were well armed, but Ricardo had the element of surprise and experience in high-pressure situations. He noticed a stack of boxes near a side exit that could serve as a viable escape route if he could create a distraction. Ricardo squeezed Clara's hand, conveying a sense of security he didn't entirely feel. "When I give the signal, run to those boxes and don't look back, okay?" Clara nodded, her eyes filled with fear but determined to follow Ricardo's instructions. With a swift motion, Ricardo pulled Clara behind a pile of boxes and, in an instant, shot a hanging light, plunging part of the warehouse into darkness. The henchmen scattered in confusion, giving Ricardo the opening he needed. "Now!" Ricardo whispered to Clara. She ran, and Ricardo followed, firing shots to create a distraction and keep the goons occupied. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he moved swiftly, his training kicking in. They reached the side exit, but Ricardo knew Moretti wouldn't make it easy. He locked the door behind them, knowing it would only buy them a few precious minutes. They needed to find a safe place to hide until they could completely escape Moretti's grasp. They headed into a dark alley near the warehouse. Ricardo knew Moretti's goons would soon be on their tail. He took out his phone and called his contact in the police force, Detective Almeida, a trusted friend. "Almeida, I need backup. I'm with Clara Martins. Send a unit to Warehouse 42, quickly," Ricardo said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "I'm on my way, Ricardo." "Hang in there," Almeida replied. Ricardo knew he had to buy time until the police arrived. He looked around the alley, searching for anything he could use as a tactical advantage. He found a fire escape leading to the roof of an abandoned building. "Clara, we're going up. From there, we'll have a better view and can plan our next move," Ricardo said, guiding her to the ladder. They climbed quickly, and when they reached the roof, Ricardo positioned himself to have a clear view of the warehouse and the surrounding streets. He could see Moretti's goons emerging from the warehouse, spreading out to search for them. Ricardo held Clara's hand firmly. "We'll stay here until the police arrive. I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Clara, despite her evident fear, trusted Ricardo. "I know you'll get us out of this, Detective. Thank you for not giving up on me." The sound of police sirens finally echoed through the city, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Ricardo knew they had won a battle, but the war against Moretti was far from over. He watched as police cars surrounded the warehouse, apprehending the goons and securing Clara's safety. When Almeida reached the roof, he found Ricardo and Clara, both exhausted but relieved. "Well done, Ricardo. We'll take Clara to a safe place. As for Moretti, we'll get him." "It's only a matter of time," Almeida said, placing a hand on Ricardo's shoulder. Ricardo nodded, knowing the fight was far from over but feeling a small victory in rescuing Clara. "Let's get her to safety." "We still have a lot of work to do," Ricardo replied, looking out over the city below them, aware that every shadow could conceal a new challenge. They descended from the roof, and Almeida led Clara to a waiting police car, ensuring her safety. Ricardo stayed back, surveying the scene, his mind already working on the next steps. As the police secured the area and took statements from Clara, Ricardo approached Almeida. "We need to keep her hidden and protected. Moretti will stop at nothing to silence her." Almeida nodded. "We have a safe house ready. She'll be under constant guard. And we're going to ramp up our efforts to bring Moretti down. This ends now." Ricardo watched as Clara was driven away to safety, a sense of resolve strengthening within him. He knew that taking down Moretti would require more than just brute force. It would take cunning, strategy, and unwavering determination. Returning to his office, Ricardo began to piece together the next phase of his plan. He reviewed the information he had gathered so far, seeking any weaknesses in Moretti's operations. Each detail, each clue, brought him closer to his ultimate goal, dismantling Moretti's criminal empire and ensuring justice for all those caught in his web. The city outside was still shrouded in fog, the night dark and full of unseen dangers. But Ricardo Costa was ready. He knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, but with Clara safe and the police on his side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He picked up the phone and began making calls, rallying his allies and preparing for the final showdown. The fight against Moretti was far from over, but Ricardo was more determined than ever to see it through to the end. With the dawn of a new day, the battle lines were drawn, and Ricardo Costa was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 9. Final Confrontation. Ricardo Costa felt the weight of responsibility like never before. The police had secured Clara's safety, but the danger was far from neutralized. Giovanni Moretti was still at large, and the shadow of his criminal empire loomed over the city. Ricardo knew that the only way to ensure everyone's safety was to confront Moretti directly and dismantle his organization once and for all. With the support of Detective Almeida and a police team, Ricardo began to devise a plan to capture Moretti. He knew the mafioso was clever and dangerous, and this confrontation would be a battle of life and death. They gathered in a safe location to discuss the strategy. Information from Viter and the informant, the cat, revealed that Moretti was hiding in an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, used as a base of operations for his criminal activities. "We'll surround the complex and cut off all escape routes. We need to catch Moretti by surprise and quickly," said Ricardo, mapping out the location on a table covered with documents. "Agreed. We'll divide the team into 3 groups. One will enter from the front, another from the back, and the third will cover the possible side exits. We need to be precise and swift," added Almeida. When night fell, the team was ready. Equipped with bulletproof vests and heavily armed, they set out towards the industrial complex. The tension in the air was palpable as they approached the location. Ricardo led the group entering from the front, determined to confront Moretti face to face. The complex was surrounded by a high fence and barbed wire. Ricardo and his team cut through the fence and moved silently across the terrain. The shadows of the old factories and abandoned warehouses created a perfect setting for a dramatic confrontation. They could hear voices coming from one of the larger warehouses, where Moretti and his goons were apparently gathered. Ricardo signaled for the other groups to get into position. When everything was ready, he gave the order to advance. Explosions of light and sounds of gunfire shattered the darkness as the team stormed the warehouse. The firefight was intense, with Moretti's henchmen desperately trying to defend their leader. Ricardo moved with precision, neutralizing the enemies that crossed his path. He knew Moretti was in the office on the upper floor of the warehouse. He climbed the stairs quickly, each step bringing him closer to the final confrontation. Entering the office, he found Moretti waiting for him, a look of hatred and desperation on his face. Moretti was armed, but Ricardo didn't hesitate. With a swift move, he disarmed the mafioso and shoved him against the wall. "It's over, Moretti. You're finished," Ricardo said, his voice firm and full of determination. Moretti laughed, a bitter and disdainful sound. "You think defeating me will change anything, Costa? There are many others like me. You can't take them all down." "Maybe not, but I can take you and your empire down. And I'll keep fighting against everyone who rises in your place," Ricardo replied, handcuffing Moretti and leading him out of the office. Downstairs, the police had already controlled the situation. Moretti's goons were apprehended, and the criminal operation dismantled. Almeida approached Ricardo, a satisfied smile on his face. "Good job, Costa. We got the big fish. Now the city can breathe a bit easier," said Almeida, shaking Ricardo's hand. Ricardo nodded, exhausted but relieved. He knew the battle was far from over, but this was a significant step in the right direction. Clara was safe, and Moretti was behind bars. He looked out at the city, still cloaked in shadows but with new hope shining in the distant lights. As they escorted Moretti to the waiting police vehicles, Ricardo felt a sense of accomplishment. The criminal kingpin's downfall was a victory, not just for him, but for the entire city. However, he remained vigilant, aware that the void left by Moretti might attract other opportunistic criminals. Returning to his office, Ricardo began the arduous task of piecing together the remnants of Moretti's empire. Every document, every lead was scrutinized, ensuring no stone was left unturned. The fight against organized crime was ongoing, but Ricardo was prepared to face it head-on. Clara's safety and the dismantling of Moretti's network were victories that Ricardo cherished deeply. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the fog, he knew that while the battle was won, the war against crime continued. And Ricardo Costa was ready for whatever came next, armed with determination and an unwavering sense of justice. Chapter 10. Conclusion and Reflections. The city was alive with renewed energy the following morning. The siege on Giovanni Moretti's empire had been a success, and news of the mafioso's arrest spread quickly. Ricardo Costa, however, felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. He knew that the battle against crime never truly ended, but this was an important step. Ricardo stood on the rooftop of a building, watching the sunrise over the city. The sky was tinged with orange and pink, a stark contrast to the shadows he had faced the previous night. He sensed a presence beside him and turned to see Clara Martins. She was calmer now, the traces of fear replaced by sincere gratitude. "Detective Costa, I have no words to thank you for what you've done for me. "For saving my life and bringing me justice," Clara said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ricardo smiled slightly, but there was a melancholy in his gaze. "It was my duty, Clara, and I will continue to do this for others. But know that you were strong too. It wasn't easy going through all this." She nodded, the morning breeze tousling her hair. "What will you do now?" Ricardo sighed, looking back at the city. "There's always more work to be done. Moretti was just part of the problem. There are many others like him out there, and someone needs to stop them." Clara placed her hand on Ricardo's shoulder, a gesture of support and respect. "I'm sure you will. The city needs people like you." Ricardo nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility once more. He bid farewell to Clara with a quick hug, promising to stay in touch. She walked away, descending the building stairs, while Ricardo remained, lost in thought. Hours later, he was back in his office. The place was quieter than usual, but for Ricardo, it was a sanctuary. He sat at his desk, opened a bottle of whiskey, and poured himself a drink. He raised the glass in a silent toast to all the victims he couldn't save, whose memory motivated him to continue. The detective picked up a new case that had been left on his desk. The work never stopped, and he was more determined than ever to keep fighting against the darkness that haunted the city. Each new case was an opportunity to make a difference, to bring a bit more light to those living in the shadows. As night fell, Ricardo lit a cigarette and looked out the window, watching the city's lights come on one by one. He knew the fight against crime was endless, but he also knew he wasn't alone. There were people like Clara, Almeida, and even Veter and the cat, who made a difference in their own ways. He stubbed out the cigarette and stood up, ready to face another day, another battle. Detective Ricardo Costa was a warrior in the shadows, always vigilant, always ready to protect the city he loved. And so, with renewed determination, Ricardo left his office and ventured into the night, prepared for whatever the future held.